We have returned yet again for episode 4 of the 0 to KSM challenge, where I am going to be trying to go from a brand new level 70 balance druid to reach Keystone Master. To do this, I will have to get my character set up, geared, and work my way up with only pugs. In the last episode, we cleared all of LFR once again, where we got incredibly lucky to get our 4-piece tier set. After that, we delved back into Mythic Plus, where we completed 6 dungeons in mainly the 6 to 8 level range. This gave us plenty more score, as it was our first Tyrannical week. With our gearing finally starting to take shape, I used some of our Sparks of Shadowflame to make some really good crafted gear in our non-tier piece spots. If you missed any of the previous videos and you want to watch them, there will be a card in the top right hand corner of your screen to a playlist that has every single episode before this one, including this one. Patch 10.1.5 is finally here, so with that we do have some changes that will affect Balance Druid. I believe some of these changes actually messed up some of our talents, but to be honest, I didn't actually notice this until halfway into the video, so I will talk about that later. As for the actual changes, they mainly just gave us some more variety and some different picks that we might take in single target versus AoE. Now, to start off this episode, I want to let you guys know that if you are trying to go for Keystone Master yourself, then I would really recommend getting to around item level 420. Since to start this video we're only item level 411, we're going to try to farm some gear this video. Hopefully, if all goes well, we can mainly focus on pushing our score for the rest of the series. The reason why I'm explaining this is because I want to try to focus on getting Drake crests this episode. While you can trade your higher level crests for lower ones, I think it is more time efficient to just farm the Mythic Plus level that you need for the crests that you want, because they can be done faster and allow for some more errors before you actually deplete the key. Plus 10 keys are the highest key level that you can farm while still getting Drake crests. This is where we will mainly farm during this video. Where our character currently is, we could definitely be trying to push our own key to plus 15 or maybe other people's keys so that we can start to get our score up to a level that would allow us to hit Keystone Master. The problem is, I don't really feel like this is fair to the average player though, so I'm going to try to get my gear a bit better before we do our final push. Since a player that maybe doesn't play as often or maybe doesn't have the experience I have would likely benefit from having better gear, since it'll be easier to get into keys, they'll do better damage, and on top of that, practicing in plus 10s is kind of the perfect area. They're difficult where if you mess up you will realize your mistake, but also not too hard to where you have to kind of beat yourself up if you mess up. Now, onto the goals for today's video. We're going to open up our vault and choose an item, craft some more Shadowflame gear and enchant our current gear, completely fill up our Mythic Plus vault slots, which will require us to complete 8 Mythic Plus dungeons, and finally, at the end of the video, we're going to do a little bit of a spending spree and spend all of the crests and flight stones that we got during this video to upgrade our gear. Alrighty, let's see what our vault gives us. So we are loot spec balance. Like I said, we do now have our 4-piece, so I think the best thing would be that weapon from Brackenhide Hollow. Other than that, an Iridius fragment, a ominous chromatic essence maybe, something along the lines of that. So let's see what we get. Okay, there is a time breaching talent, which isn't a very good trinket. We might have to sim this one, but this is very unlucky. It is 431, which leads me to believe it would probably be the best. So we're not going to take this chest piece. I'm not going to take the helmet. I'm inclined, this does have avoidance, but I'm kind of inclined not to take it because it's the same eye level and we're trading what, haste for mastery, which is an okay trade, but I don't really think this is too worth it. This cape might be, but yeah, it's basically the exact same as this other cloak, but it is on the hero track. I will sim this, like I said, I just like to sim just to be sure, but my guess would probably be this trinket. For the most part, with simming, I usually would sim with single target for my warlock, for example, since I do raid and do mythic plus, but to be honest, for this boomkin, I'm mainly just going to be simming for AoE, so 5 targets for a minute, just because my boomkin single target is pretty bad anyways, so I don't think it's too much of a worry. Yeah, so it looks like the trinket is the best option. It's about 2.5% better than any other option, and every other option is only an increase of 0.2. So yeah, we're definitely going to take the trinket. I believe it might be better in single target, but yeah, it's an increase in AoE over anything else. So yeah, we're going to take it. So yeah, we're going to take the time breaching talon, and because of last week when we got a +10 done, we will actually get a 10 Uldaman, which is perfect because we actually haven't done Uldaman on either tyrannical or fortified. So yeah, that's honestly pretty good. In terms of the vault, this is okay. I actually believe one of my first items that I got from my vault on my warlock was also this trinket. Honestly, currently with our gear, we'll pretty much take anything. And it is a big item level increase, which is pretty important. First up, we have a +10 Halls of Infusion. But before we get into that, we have to talk about the affixes this week. Those being Fortified, which I explained in the second episode of the series, which will buff the mob's health and damage. The other affix we will be dealing with is Volcanic, which states that when in combat, enemies periodically cause gouts of flame to erupt beneath the feet of distant players. This affix can deal some damage if you're standing in it when it goes off, but overall, as long as you don't get hit by more than one at a time, or your health isn't super low, it's not too bad of an affix. Back to the dungeon. So, Halls of Infusion is currently our best dungeon to run for gear, because it can drop a really good trinket, the Iridius Fragment, or a best in slot offhand, the Rod of the Perfect Order. The first couple packs before the first boss are actually quite fun, as they can let you pump some early DPS. The only mechanic that you really need to watch out for defensively are these orbs that can cast Containment Beam. If you are targeted by a Containment Beam, a defensive isn't 100% necessary, but if you have a low cooldown around maybe a minute and a half that's a defensive, then I would probably recommend using it, especially since you can be targeted by more than one of these at a time. As you can see in this pull, our healer fell behind after he nearly died to one of these beams. This led to our warrior dying to one, and then another beam targets me, and our tank loses aggro, which then takes me out. While running back, our hunter and our healer die. We make it back in time before our tank dies, so it wasn't a total wipe per se, but don't worry, there's a lot more to come. The first boss is dealt with. Our warrior does die at the very end. I'm not sure if it was just from something he was standing in. The main problem that I found for this group was interrupts. I'm unsure if it was just a lack of knowledge or lack of effort, but kicks are very, very important in this dungeon. And our group just kind of lacked kicks. We just didn't use them that often, and it led to a lot of unnecessary deaths. The second boss was more of the same. It was done with relative ease. Now, one thing that you guys really need to watch out for in this dungeon is these dragons, as they are one of the biggest killers in this dungeon. It has a big group-wide damage ability that leaves a dot on after, and I highly recommend you use a defensive or a healer cooldown to live it. Our tank does die here because he's too impatient and doesn't give our healer a chance to get some mana back when he is completely Because our tank did die, I had to kite a little bit and kite the mobs back, which led to even more deaths. After the third boss, we had upped our death total to 11. For the most part, these were caused by lack of defensive usage or subpar healing. What happened next was probably one of the most ridiculous sequences I've ever seen in a Mythic Plus key. It is time for us to spend the next 12 minutes absolutely bricking this key because of deaths to getting knocked off the platform before the last boss or from the waves that come at you. We had multiple deaths, multiple wipes. It was pretty rough. So if you guys are a masochist or you just like to see me suffer, I'm gonna show you guys a little compilation. After all that, me and the tank killed the last boss. As you can see, this was our first depleted key of this challenge. We did still gain 126 score, but I know that we're going to have to come back because we didn't get either item that we wanted, so we will be back here later to rectify this. To try to recover from that absolute disaster, I decided to list my own key instead. I had 3 players sign up who were all from the same guild, likely trying to carry one of their friends' alts. I had no problem with this though, as the players with less gear still had around similar levels gear to my own, and they likely could use their experience from their main and apply it to this alt. I could tell right away, strictly from the first pull, that the Brewmaster Monk was confident and did pretty big and fun pulls. This was a great sign for the rest of the dungeon. The first and second boss went very well. My DPS was benefiting a lot from these big pulls, and the overgeared hunter that came with them made bosses an absolute breeze. The first real dangerous mob in this dungeon for ranged DPS players is this golem right here. This mob works very similar to the dragons in the Halls of Infusion. It does a group-wide AoE that cannot be stopped, so most of your group is gonna have to use a defensive or you will be brought to nearly half of your health. These golems later on in the dungeon look very similar to the early ones, but the main difference is that their AoE ability can actually be avoided by line of sight. Our priest wasn't fast enough and did die here. Later on, I think our tank got a little too ambitious as he also died, and once the mobs lost aggro, they went for a player with the highest damage, which was our hunter. I managed to get a battle res off in time for the tank, and with this we were able to stabilize. After this pull, our healer also mentioned having a lag spike, so to be honest, this was probably just unlucky and nothing to worry about. Near the end of the dungeon, our healer tried to ask our Shadow Priest to mass dispel here, as the dot that you get from these infinite time weavers is quite deadly. I think the priest wasn't sure what the healer was referring to, so I tried to heal him, but I was just a little too late. This is one of those instances where as you guys keep practicing, you will get better with using your utility, and it definitely would have caused this priest to not die here. And with 2 minutes to spare, we killed the 5th and final boss. Our Raider.io score increased by 143. Sadly, we got no loot, but our key did upgrade to a 13 freehold. Our next key was a plus 11 Brackenhide Hollow. This was our first opportunity where we got to play with an Augmentation Evoker, which was the new spec added in patch 10.1.5. Lots of players have mixed opinions of this spec. Trust me when I say that this spec is very, very good and very overpowered. It will not look like it on the damage meters, but that is because the buffs that Augmentation provides for the group are lumped into their own damage. So this means that the meters are only showing the damage that the Evoker's damaging spells are actually doing, which is, to be honest, a tiny part of what it actually does. On top of that, they provide tons of utility. You can see my group actually joked about this, which made me realize that this run might actually be really fun and just chill. Luckily, once again, we got blessed with a really good and focused tank who was willing to do large pulls to get this key done as fast as possible. Stink Breath is a very dangerous mob on Fortified Week, so you guys gotta be sure to watch out for. You need to always be paying attention so that you can avoid getting one-shot by any of his abilities. Overall in this run, there wasn't too much to go over, to be honest. We had good DPS to kill packs very fast. Our healer kept us alive and topped up, and our tank did good big pulls while keeping aggro. Within only 15 minutes, we were already at the final boss, who fell about a minute later. We managed to gain 36 score and a new trinket. It isn't the weapon that we wanted from this dungeon, but this trinket does have a passive effect, which means we can replace our other trinket, and this is another big item level upgrade. While it isn't the best trinket by any means, it is the best equip effect trinket from Mythic Plus. I also decided, since pretty much everybody in this group was really good and really nice to play with, I added everybody. You won't always get added back by the people that you want to play with again in Mythic Plus, but the warrior who was the top damage did add me back. I think this is a really good tip for somebody who plays solo. You can meet lots of good and nice people just by adding someone that was kind or did good DPS in a Mythic Plus run. After this dungeon, I wanted to upgrade my gear just in case we didn't get as lucky with our groups like we did for the last two. To start, I went and wanted to use another one of our Spark of Shadowflames to craft a ring. Our ring from the vault last week is already very good, and all it needs is some upgrades, but our other one doesn't have the best stats. I decided that I would craft a ring, since when you craft one, it also comes with a socket as well. I went to the auction house and bought the mats that I would need, and then I asked around in trade chat. I eventually found somebody, but I want to talk about something that's kind of geared towards new players when it comes to crafting. If you are like me in this challenge, for example on your first character, or you likely just don't have much gold, do not feel pressured by people who whisper you saying that they want a commission of something like 3, 5, or even 10,000 gold. If you're feeling generous, then by all means give them a good tip. But if you're limited to say 30,000 gold, then a 500 to 1,000 gold tip will be plenty if you are willing to ask around a bit. After spending thousands and thousands of gold to buy the mats to craft your gear, you then need to spend gold on enchants, gems, and consumables. With all this combined, your commissions don't need to be crazy high by any means. Anyways, with that out of the way, I sent in the work order and received my 424 item level Haste Mastery ring. I then headed over to the Catalyst, since I do have my 4 set, but I'm going to spend one of my charges on my bracers. This is because the bracers that you get from the raid have really desirable stats for Boomkin. Next, I wanted to craft a prismatic gem for my ring. Since you can only have one of these gems at a time, I wanted to socket it into a piece of gear that I wouldn't replace. Since this ring can be upgraded further with enchanted crests, it was a better option than my necklace. Speaking of my necklace, I went to the auction house and bought 2 more sockets for it. You always want to use the rank 3 version as the last one for a necklace, but the other ones, the first and second one, can be a rank 2. I then went for enchants. I got avoidance for my bracers and cloak, and then for both of my rings I got a mastery enchant. The most expensive purchase was a frozen spell thread for my crafted pants. I got 3 more gems that were mastery haste for my necklace, and we now have every enchant or gem except for a weapon. I'm waiting on my weapon enchant because it is very expensive, and I want to find a weapon with better stats first. We've completed one of our goals. We have now enchanted and crafted all the gear we will need for this video. With our shiny new enchants, I thought that we would try our luck back in Halls of Fusion once again. I already explained the mobs that I want you guys to watch out for. On the second boss, I got a little too confident. I forgot to check my death log here, but I believe it was from the overpowering croak, which does damage to all players while spawning swirlies. I must have barely been in the swirly, I remember at the time actually, I was about to press renewal for the 30% heal, which probably would have meant I would have lived. Regardless, we had another 2 deaths on the ice boss. These were very early on from the hailstorm ability. And sadly, once again, just like last time, when it came to the mini boss right before the last boss, we had a few players, actually including myself, fall off trying to dodge abilities. Everybody but me died, so I had to kite some of the mobs while waiting for everybody to run back. I really think the run back in this dungeon, even with the speed boost, is just ridiculous. It seems really outdated and it's super frustrating. We try again and our tank and healer fall off again. We get the mini boss to 13% health before she resets. At this point, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Once again, our lack of interrupts and positioning is getting another Halls of Infusion key bricked after a almost flawless run. We finally kill it and the boss dies in no time. We did gain 12 score since we finished it faster than last time and the timer wasn't up yet. A Iridius fragment dropped and I thought I was about to cry as the Shadow Priest, who was the leader of this group, who had next to no gear, got it to drop. This meant that he needed it and he wasn't going to be able to trade it to me even if he wanted to. But I didn't let this shake my confidence. I was determined. So I went right back in with another level 9 Halls of Infusion. I've gone over this dungeon twice now, so I'm going to skip right to the ending. I had my best overall damage out of all 3 of the runs by a mile. And finally, after all my suffering, I was rewarded with a Rod of Perfect Order. Now, it wasn't the Iridius fragment, but what this offhand does mean is that once I get enough gold from doing world quests, I will be able to have a best in slot offhand for a crafted main hand, so we'll have the perfect combo. As soon as I was done this dungeon, I went off to do some Dragonriding world quests for gold. I wasn't able to get enough gold during this video, but hopefully by the next video or sometime during the next video, we will finally have enough to craft our main hand. While I was doing these world quests, I noticed that my talents weren't the same as many of the Wowhead, Icy Veins, or top players builds. I spent a little bit of time changing my AoE build, and I ended up with this one, which once I was done, I finished the rest of my world quests, which left me with 6 Dragonriding bags to open. We will need at least 10,000 gold for our weapon, so this is a great start. Finally, it was time to get right back into some dungeons for more crests and score. We signed up for a +10 Vortex Pinnacle since it was one of the final 3 dungeons that we were missing on Fortified Week. Our kicks in this dungeon were a bit lacking, to be honest, so I really had to focus up with using Solar Beam, Typhoon, and Incapacitating Roar basically on cooldown. Right here, a few wind bolts targeted our healer who was already low on health and he ended up dying. When dealing with the young storm drakes in this dungeon, the healing well can be a very great help. Icy Buffet works like the golems in Uldaman and the dragons in Halls of Infusion. It does group-wide damage with a dot afterwards. I feel like you guys can really start to notice that most of the dungeons in this game are very similar in terms of abilities that mobs do and the flow of them. They may have different names and they may be slightly different, but your cooldown and defensive usage, once you actually understand these abilities, can become very predictable. I've actually never seen this skip before that this tank did, so let me know in the comments down below if you guys knew about this skip or maybe if you use it yourself. This pull right here is a really hard pull and our tank died very early on into it. It seemed like it kind of caught him off guard and the healer didn't really seem ready either. I tried to shadow meld it once everybody else was dead, but I wasn't very successful. After we all grouped up again, I made a foolish mistake. I was the first one to get targeted by the lightning lash and I took too long to get into the safe zone. We did still have 3 battle reses, so I got one of those, and from there on, it was no real problem. The rest of the dungeon wasn't too bad. We finished with a 2 chest and actually managed to see a mount drop for the healer. Congrats to that guy. The actual gear that dropped wasn't anything I needed, so I was happy with the 54 score that I got. I did get a Splintered Spark of Shadowflame, so I could finish the weekly rep quest to get the other half. I headed down to the Zaralek Caverns, where I used my last rep item that I gained from the campaign questline. We got a ring, which wasn't an upgrade, but now we do have 3 more Sparks of Shadowflame. Our 7th dungeon of the video was a +10 Neltharus. I tried to get this group to use the chains to kill the trash packs, as these chains deal a massive amount of damage, but I don't think they could really understand how they worked or how to use them. 2 of our players spoke different languages, so it was pretty understandable. For those of you who don't know, if you click on the chains, then run through the mobs, it'll then explode and deal lots of damage. I actually had a death here right before Forge Master. This was due to aggro from a patrol pack that the tank didn't notice got pulled. I was pretty frustrated. As you can see right here, I'm about to type something and I realized that I just need to take a deep breath and relax. If I was to flame the tank and get mad at him, it would only make me play worse because I'd be pissed off, and it would only make my goal of finishing the dungeon even harder. The final boss was a slight struggle as we weren't able to break his molten shield fast enough, leading to a full wipe, which led to us actually losing the chance to get 2 chests. Me and the healer had a bit of a disagreement as I felt like the extra healing would help a lot more in this fight if the rest of the group, excluding me and the healer, were able to get the items to break the shield. It seemed like during this fight that our health was just getting absolutely destroyed during the molten shield, so I felt like me doing some off healing would help out a lot more. Regardless, once the dungeon was finished, we got a 415 chest piece from the end of the dungeon. I will hold on to this since it is on the champion track and I could catalyze it in the future. This Neltharus gave us 70 score. We have come to our final dungeon for this week, which will be a +11 Neltharion's Lair. My damage in this dungeon was pretty good. I felt really confident, especially as the dungeon went on longer. The flow felt really good with my rotation and how I had to react to the mob's abilities. The first 2 bosses we had absolutely no problem. I made a mistake right before Neuraxis. Our mage attacked the next pack that we were about to pull, so I followed suit with a Moonfire, which caused me to gain aggro and I got meleeed to death. I believe that the tank was typing or something like that because he was standing still and wasn't able to react in time. I asked for a battle res since it was the first death of the dungeon and we had 2 more available. The only other slight problem was on the last boss we had a spiral effect of bad positioning. The crystal spikes were placed way too far from the boss, and the tank pretty much kept the boss in the same spot without adjusting to the crystals. This led to the first ad taking a long time to get stunned, and then it was a long run for the tank to get cover to hide from the magma wave. Regardless, it didn't really matter. We still got a 3 chest and I gained 58 score. This means that we have completed another goal for today's video, with that being our 8th and final dungeon for today. To end off today's video, I wanted to upgrade our gear with all of the crests and flight stones that we got during this video. I did a few sims and I'm not going to upgrade my belt or weapon because I do plan to make crafted gear for those very soon. The first item we're going to upgrade is our tier helmet, then our haste mastery necklace, our tier shoulders, and last but not least our cloak. This leaves us at item level 418, so we are getting very close to item level 420 with a vault and more crafted gear to come next week. Thank you guys very much for watching today's episode. I really appreciate all the support on this series. All of you guys commenting and subscribing really do make my day. If you did enjoy this episode, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new content from me. I will see you guys next week for episode 5 of the 0 to KSM challenge.